Greetings, everyone. So today we will talk about perception or Sangya. This is one of the 5 aggregates which form the basis of all psychophysical experiences. So just want to do a bit of a deep dive on that. Want to share some thoughts and also welcome your thoughts and questions on that. Just as a basis for this, I will read a few lines from the beginning of the Majjhima Nikāya Sutta number 43, which is the Mahavedal Sutra, or the greater classification, greater series of questions and answers. So I'll start with the Sutta reading, and this is a very power-packed Sutta. It's every line of it can lead to a discussion and understanding for us, but we'll try to keep it limited to one topic, more or less, which is perception or Sangya, and use the rest of the parts of the Sutta that we read today to understand how it goes in conjunction with that. So Mahavedal Sutra, this is the 43rd Sutra in the middle-length discourses or the Majjhima Nikāya. This is presented as a series of questions and answers, and I'm using the translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi today. Thus have I heard, on one occasion, the Blessed One was living at Shravasti in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindik's park. Then, when it was evening, the Venerable Mahakothita rose from meditation, went to the Venerable Sariputta and exchanged greetings with him. When the courteous and amiable talk was finished, he sat down at one side and said to the Venerable Sariputta. So in the Sangha of the monks, this was often a method used for introducing new concepts, new ideas, new ways of understanding the Dhamma to junior monks. So 2 or more senior monks would have a conversation, have a series of questions and answers, and that would be used for as a instructional device. So first they talk about wisdom. And this is very important. We often hear the word wise, wisdom. There are a few different ways in which it has been defined in different suttas. I'll touch upon that. And there's a particular way in which it is defined here. One who is unwise. One who is unwise is said friend. With reference to what is this said? One who is unwise. One does not wisely understand. One does not wisely understand friend. That is why it is said, one who is unwise. And what doesn't one wisely understand? One does not wisely understand. This is suffering. One does not wisely understand. This is the origin of suffering. One does not wisely understand. This is the cessation of suffering. One does not wisely understand. This is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. One does not wisely understand. One does not wisely understand, friend. That is why it is said, one who is unwise. So Sariputta gave this answer to Mahakothita about who is unwise. And in doing so, he has paraphrased the 4 noble truths taught by the Buddha. The truth of suffering, the truth of the origin of suffering, which is craving, the truth of the cessation of suffering, which comes from the cessation of craving, and the way leading to the cessation of suffering, which is the eightfold path that the Buddha taught. There are a number of suttas in which people go to the Buddha and they ask a number of metaphysical questions. What happens after the Buddha's death? Whether this world is eternal, whether it is infinite, multiple questions, trying to get from the Buddha an understanding of everything that happens in the cosmos. But the Buddha says, often uses these occasions to bring students back to the point that he is focusing on, the point that he is teaching, which is only the end of suffering. So the Buddha says, I teach only the end of suffering. I teach only the Four Noble Truths. This is suffering. This is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. And this is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. Time and again, the Buddha brings his students back to focus on building those capabilities, building that understanding within themselves, which actually leads them to the end of suffering. Other ways in which wisdom are defined in the suttas, one is the understanding of the three characteristics. What are the three characteristics? The three characteristics that come across in multiple suttas are the characteristic of impermanence. All things are subject that have arisen are also subject to ending. The characteristic of suffering, which comes from the lack of understanding the impermanence of things and taking them personally. And finally, the characteristic of impersonality or non-self. Understanding that the self is a concept that arises and falls in a particular context to help us deal with that situation well. Understanding that all mental phenomena are the outcome of impersonal processes that start, that arise, that sustain, and that end because the conditions are right for them to happen. So these are the three characteristics also related to how the Buddha defined wisdom. Impermanence, suffering, and impersonality or non-self. The third way to demonstrate wisdom or to describe wisdom is the understanding of dependent origination. As I mentioned just before, all phenomena are the culmination that we experience, are the culmination of an impersonal process that starts with some information being received by one of our sense organs and us processing it in a way that is colored and affected by the way we have come to be at that moment. The impressions that we've had in our mind, in our body, the conditioning that has happened as a result of those impressions, experiences that we've had, actions that we've taken, thoughts that we have thought, things that we have said. All of these are affecting and coloring the way we interpret the current situation, and how these phenomena, starting from an impersonal meeting of information with our sense organs, become something very personal as we use the basis of craving, use the basis of a liking or disliking mind to create an understanding of that situation, to create an opinion of that situation, to create an attachment of the situation, to create an attachment of the outcomes that we want from that situation. Now that this thing has arisen, I want it to go away, or I want it to stay forever. These kind of attachments, as we start getting involved with them, what started as an impersonal chain of mental activity starts becoming personal, and being subject to impermanence leads to suffering. What we want, even if we get it, due to the underlying impermanence, it is likely to change. We are likely to change. Our opinion of wanting that is likely to change. Something that we don't want may come to us because the conditions are right for it. and again create suffering for us. So this is the beginning where he talks about Mahakotthita questions Sariputta about what it means to be unwise and what it means to be wise. Continuing on the same stream of thought, he says, saying, good friend, the venerable Mahakotthita delighted and rejoiced in the venerable Sariputta's words. Then he asked him a further question. One who is wise is said, friend, with reference to what is this said? One who is wise. So we can infer the answer that is going to come from Sariputta. One wisely understands, friend. That is why it is said, one who is wise. What does one wisely understand? One wisely understands this is suffering. One wisely understands this is the origin of suffering. One wisely understands this is the cessation of suffering. One wisely understands this is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. One wisely understands, friend. That is why it is said, one who is wise. Consciousness. Consciousness is said, friend. With reference to what is consciousness said? It cognizes, friend. That is why consciousness is said. What does it cognize? It cognizes this is pleasant. It cognizes this is painful. It cognizes this is neither painful nor pleasant. It cognizes, friend. That is why consciousness is said. So this is a tricky word, consciousness, the way it is translated, and that is true of many words that are translated into English or into other languages. They may not be direct equivalents of the words in Pali or the roots they have in Sanskrit. So it's useful, I find, many times to examine what the root words are also, and to understand these specific terms that the Buddha uses in contrast with what may be popular meanings or interpretations of the same word. The word consciousness can be used in multiple contexts. Somebody is conscious or unconscious. Consciousness can be thought of as awareness. Consciousness can, a lot of people use the word consciousness to think of a base faculty of awareness. The Advaita tradition talks about universal consciousness. So it's a word that is used in many different ways, even in the context of the contemplative traditions, right? So the consciousness that's used by the Buddha is based on the word Vigyan. Vigyan has two parts to it, and Gyan. Gyan means knowledge, and V denotes the ability to discriminate between different things. So let's go back to the way that Sariputta defines it here. It says consciousness cognizes this is pleasant, it cognizes this is painful, it cognizes this is neither painful nor pleasant. So consciousness takes different information from our environment and is able to assign a certain value to it in terms of pleasantness or unpleasantness. It can also give cognition, or consciousness also helps in discriminating between information in multiple other ways. So for example, if we see 5 people standing in front of us, we are able to see that they have different heights. Somebody is taller than the other, somebody is shorter than the other. So consciousness, or this discriminatory ability to take information and identify that there are multiple people in our field of vision and that they have different heights. So being able to rank order the information that comes. Primarily, it is used to understand what in the environment is pleasant, what is painful, and what is neither painful nor pleasant. So that is the fundamental capability of consciousness. And why is this important? How it works with the others is something we'll touch upon. Wisdom and consciousness friend. Are these states conjoined or disjoined? And is it possible to separate each of these states from the other in order to describe the difference between them? Wisdom and consciousness friend. These states are conjoined, not disjoined. And it is impossible to separate each of these states from the other in order to describe the difference between them. For what one wisely understands, that one cognizes. And what one cognizes, that one wisely understands. That is why these states are conjoined, not disjoined. And it is impossible to separate each of these states from the other in order to describe the difference between them. What is the difference, friend, between wisdom and consciousness? These states that are conjoined, not disjoined. The difference, friend, between wisdom and consciousness, these states that are conjoined, not disjoined, is this. Wisdom is to be developed. Consciousness is to be fully understood. So this seems to be a little tricky. Let's explore what Sariputta is talking about. So let's first look at what is the way in which they are conjoined with each other. Sariputta says, what one wisely understands, that one cognizes, and what one cognizes, that one wisely understands. So consciousness or cognition is the basis by which we create our understanding, create our wisdom, create our understanding of different things. So cognition takes information from the environment and it is able to separate one thing from the other. If we were not able to separate it, everything would be like one uniform blur of stimuli that are coming in, one mixed blur of light that is coming towards us, one mixed blur of sounds that is coming into us, one mixed blur of bodily contacts that are happening, one mixed blur of thoughts. So consciousness helps us to identify the difference between the information that is coming from different things. In front of me, there is a laptop, there is a window, there is a lamp. Cognition helps to separate the information. It is still not telling me what these things are. It is helping in identifying that these are different objects around me. And our understanding of what is around us, our understanding of what are the things in our environment, our understanding of different mental phenomena comes from the basis of cognition. Because we are able to separate different phenomena, we are able to understand how those phenomena interact with each other, how one phenomenon gives rise to the other. The better we understand this, the more we are able to differentiate at a granular level. Once we understand how things interact with each other, once we understand how they respond to one another, once we understand how one thing leads to the other, we are able to also differentiate, cognize, discriminate the information better. So that's what Sariputta means when he says, for what one wisely understands, that one cognizes, and what one cognizes, that one wisely understands. So these are feeding into each other. Our ability to understand the difference between different things feeds into our understanding, and our understanding helps us to further distinguish between things more effectively. And what are the ways in which these states that are not conjoined, that are conjoined, not, what is the difference between these states that are conjoined but not disjoined? So here Sariputta says, wisdom is to be developed. Consciousness is to be fully understood. So wisdom is to be developed through a high level of discriminatory ability, by being able to understand different phenomena for what they are, being able to understand the granularity of it, being able to see that helps in wisdom to be developed, and consciousness is to be fully understood. How does consciousness work? How does it create those? How does it discriminate between the information that is coming in from the environment? That is to be fully understood. So how consciousness operates, that is to be understood. This leads to wisdom being developed, and wisdom being developed allows us to understand consciousness better. That is the difference, how they are developed, how we can make progress in our wisdom and in our consciousness, developing our wisdom and understanding our consciousness. Feeling. Feeling is said, friend. With reference to what is feeling said? It feels, friend. That is why feeling is said. What does it feel? It feels pleasure. It feels pain. It feels neither pain nor pleasure. It feels, friend. That is why feeling is said. Perception. Perception is said, friend. With reference to what is perception said? It perceives, friend. That is why perception is said. What does it perceive? It perceives blue, it perceives yellow, it perceives red, and it perceives white. It perceives, friend. That is why perception is said. Feeling, perception, and consciousness, friend, are these states conjoined or disjoint? And is it possible to separate each of these states from the other in order to describe the difference between them? Feeling, perception, and consciousness, friend, these states are conjoined, not disjoint. And it is impossible to separate each of these states from the other in order to describe the difference between them. For what one feels, that one perceives, and what one perceives, that one cognizes. I'll just repeat this line. For what one feels, that one perceives, and what one perceives, that one cognizes. That is why these states are conjoined, not disjoint. And it is impossible to separate each of these states from the others in order to describe the difference between them. So from a reading of the Sutta, I will pause at this point in the Sutta, and I want to speak more about feeling, perception, and consciousness. So like we did with the consciousness, let's also look at the root words for feeling and perception. Again, these are words that have different connotations, different interpretations in the English language, in different contemplative traditions. The root word for feeling here is Vedana. And the one thing that we need to understand is we are not, when we talk about feeling, we are not talking about emotion. We are talking about feeling as a very pre-conceptual signal. It feels pleasure, it feels pain, it feels neither pain nor pleasure. It feels, friend. That is why feeling is said. So feeling is a signal that denotes the level of pleasure or pain, or neither pleasure or pain, in a particular interaction. Okay, we'll come back to this. And the next part, Mahakohita talks to Sariputra about perception. The root word for perception is the Sanskrit word Sangya, which literally means noun in Sanskrit and in Hindi. And what we are talking about when it comes to perception is, another way to translate this is concepts that are held in the mind. And the example helps us to kind of understand this. What does it perceive? It perceives blue, it perceives yellow, perceives red, it perceives white. Things that we are familiar with, things for which we have labels in our mind, the perception is helping us match the information that is coming from the environment with the labels that we have in our mind already. So why is this important? Why is the pain? Why is it important to discriminate information that is coming in from the environment? Why is it important to have a feeling that denotes pleasure, pain, and neither pain nor pleasure? And why is it important to have labels related to that? And how does it all come together in creating our experience? So to discuss this, we will go back a little farther than the Buddha and basically look at how we have evolved as beings. Right? So one of the main things that all beings, all living beings that are around today, three things that they are naturally good at, or we can call it one thing that they are naturally good at, which is why they are around today. Right? So they are good at surviving, they're good at preventing immediate termination, right? Harm, avoiding harm. Good at avoiding harm. They are good at conserving energy, being able to gather enough energy to survive in comparison to the energy that they're expending, right? So more energy is coming in than the energy that is going in. And the third thing is they are capable of passing on their genes. So they have inbuilt mechanisms which make them good at reproducing and motivated to reproduce. So these are the three fundamental kind of motivations that are there for any living being. The motivation to avoid harm, the motivation to manage your energy, which is related to eating food and not taking part in activities that will make us completely exhausted or deprived of food and water to the point that we die. And finally, being able to pass on our genes. So these are kind of fundamental motivations. So how does feeling, perception, and consciousness come into this? So at any point of time, we are receiving a lot of information from the environment. So at this point, you may be looking at the screen, you may be looking at my face, you may be listening to what I'm saying, but there is a lot of information that is coming from around you. There may be something like a fan or source of air circulation where you're sitting. You are sitting on a surface, you have contact, you have signals coming in from there. You have multiple sounds other than my voice that is coming to you. It may be some noise, some sounds from outside, somebody speaking somewhere. You'll be getting all these signals. So as a living being, we continuously get a lot of these signals. Now, in order to be capable of surviving and passing on our gene, if you look at humans, so it takes multiple years for a human being to become viable, to be able to pass on their genes. And they have to survive that long in a very competitive and complicated environment. One misstep and you may fall off a cliff. You may have a tree fall on top of you. You may be attacked by a wild animal. We are talking about a time much before the Buddha, which is the basis of the kind of mechanisms that govern us today. You may become the meal for an animal. You may not find food. You may eat something poisonous. And all of these things affect your basic motivations, hardwired evolutionary motivations of harm avoidance, energy conservation, and reproduction. Right? So what cognition or consciousness, Vigyan, does is it starts separating all the information that is coming. We are capable of processing only the information that is cognizable by our sense bases. So we have ears, we have eyes, we have taste, we have a tongue for tasting, we have skin, and we have our nose, and we have our mind for processing thought. So these are the sense spaces that we have. A lot of information comes in. We cannot process information that is not discernible by our sense bases. So for example, we cannot see ultraviolet light or hear ultrasound sounds, right? So within what our sense bases are capable of processing, consciousness starts seeing what are the different things that are there, tries to discriminate between the different types of information that is coming. Now, feeling or Vedana is a preconception. Before we understand what is happening, based on the information that is coming in, feeling helps to draw our attention to things that may either be dangerous to us, that may affect us negatively in terms of surviving, in terms of avoiding harm, in terms of energy conservation. And it also alerts us to things that are good for us, that are furthering our motivations for harm avoidance and for energy conservation. So how does this work? For example, if you touch something very hot or very sharp, you will immediately get a painful sensation. If you're touching something that is neutral, that is not very comfortable, either not very uncomfortable, you will get a neutral sensation. If you're touching something that is very comfortable, that will help you sleep better, you will get a pleasurable feeling. So these sensations help draw our attention. Something that is very unpleasant, like standing on a sharp thorn or a nail, this is something that might affect our ability to avoid harm. So if you're in the jungle and you step on a thorn and you are not able to walk away or run away, you may become an animal's next meal, right? It may also affect your ability to forage for food or hunt for food and survive and manage your energy budget, right? So those are the reasons why certain things will send out a unpleasant feeling. The same thing with a fruit, for example, a fruit that is rotting will have a certain smell, and immediately our consciousness helps in identifying this, differentiating between the smell of a ripe fruit and a rotting fruit, right? And feeling immediately creates an unpleasant sensation. It discourages us from eating the rotten fruit. And if it is a ripe, healthy fruit, it creates the kind of pleasant feeling that motivates us towards eating it. So what feeling, consciousness, and perception are doing is they are helping us to model the environment. We cannot pay attention to everything in the environment at the same time, because our mind has limited ability to process things. And what we want to do is, instead of trying to see everything that is happening everywhere all at once and making sense of it, because this will cause us to expend a lot of energy. That is why we are wired not to do something like that. And mental processing, understanding things, making sense of the environment is a very, very expensive activity. So what happens is, as the consciousness is differentiating between the information that it is receiving from the environment, feeling helps to direct our attention towards those things that are of interest, things that are beneficial to us, like a ripe fruit, things that are harmful to us, like the sharp tip of a thorn that we are about to step on, right? It helps us do that. Now, in order for us to take action, we need to understand better what is the situation and what we need to do with it, which is where perception comes in. Perception helps us to map the environment with things that we already understand. We have mental models that we reduce the environment to. We may smell the rotting fruit. Some part of our mind looks at the fruit, sees that it's a fruit, it wants to eat it, but we get a smell that is telling us this is not maybe a good idea. Once we understand, once perception kicks in, it says this is the fruit, there is some problem with it, and maybe the perception helps us to understand that actually only a part of it is rotting. We can chop it off and eat the rest. So perception helps us to model the environment in a way that we are able to take further action. Consciousness and feeling help to direct our attention to things in our environment that may be dangerous for us or may be good for us. Perception helps us to model this into specific things. What does perception help in this, in the example of the conversation? Perception says it is red, it is white, it is yellow. As we discussed, perception comes from the root word sangya, which is noun. So all your concepts, whether it is red, white, blue, yellow, ripe, unripe, fruit, vegetable, tree, thorn, animal. So all those things are happening once your attention is already directed towards a particular object in the environment. And based on that perception, we are able to make sense of the environment. Again, what we feel, we perceive. What we perceive, we cognize. Cognition comes in again. Cognition helps understand what we perceive, whether it is something beneficial, that is pleasurable, whether it is something painful, that is something that will be dangerous for us, or whether it is something neutral, and helps us to decide and take action. So this is how these three things work together: feeling, perception, and consciousness. Now, why is this important? Why is it important to understand perception in particular? Perception tries to model the environment. We have to understand the difference between a concept, that is perception, a blue, white, a yellow, a fruit, a person, and reality. So our mind, in order to conserve energy, tries to compress the information as much as possible. So when you see a fruit, it just says fruit. It does not look at the specific things that may be particular to that fruit. So in our mind, for most cases, for day-to-day, a lot of day-to-day functioning, just knowing that this is a table, this is a chair, this is something I can sit on, this is something I can work on, I can write on, this is something I can eat, this is food, that is sufficient. We don't need to get into more details. But perception can also become very misleading, because perception tries to model the environment in the most economical way. How can I reduce something that is very complex into something that is very simple and allows me to take information? So perception also, or sangya also, can become harmful when we start being beset with perceptions and concepts related to us, related to people, related to situations. When we start going away from the basic reality and we start going into things like, what is the motivation of a person who said this? How does it affect my self-esteem or self-respect? What do I feel about it? So things like jealousy, things like betrayal, things like unfairness, things like vendetta or vengeance, all these also come as perceptions. So what happens is, we take a complex situation that is happening. It may be a person, we may have a concept of a friend, we may have a concept of an enemy. There are entire groups of people who may treat people of a different political leaning or a different country as enemies. So in these cases, what happens is, perception becomes very, very reductive, and it causes us to perform actions that are for our own suffering or for the suffering of others. So perception, in a nutshell, can be said to be a very compressed representation of the real world. But in order to act quickly, in order to survive in the wild, for example, we have been conditioned internally to treat perception or concepts as the same as reality, and we act on that. So one of the things that the Buddha often talks about going towards wisdom is knowledge and vision of things as they are, which means not being trapped within our concepts, our perceptions, but being able to see things in much greater detail when they need to. Things that are causing craving in our mind. When that craving happens, being able to see how that is part of an impersonal process, and when that craving leads to certain views, opinions, clinging, mental proliferation, being able to understand again how that is part of an impersonal process, how that is coming about because we are getting trapped in a concept rather than the reality. So that's what I wanted to touch on. I think this is a very interesting topic, and I'm sure a lot of you will have comments. How perception, feeling, and consciousness. The Buddha defines the 5 aggregates that make up psychophysical experiences as form or rupa, sanskar or formations. This sanskar refers to how different impressions, experiences that we've had from the external environment, and impressions that we've had due to our own actions, mental, verbal, and physical actions, and how they make us, they influence our preferences, our tendencies. So the same fruit, for example, may evoke a very pleasant feeling in someone, and it may evoke an unpleasant feeling in someone. So cilantro or coriander or dhania is an herb that causes a very extreme reaction in different people. That's a result of the tendencies, the impressions that they've had, the sanskara. And the other 3 of the aggregates, mental aggregates, are feeling, perception, and consciousness that help us to make sense of the environment, that help us to navigate the environment without having to understand all of it, that reduce the environment into concepts that appear to be most rewarding or most dangerous to us, and motivate us to take actions on that. At the same time, because concepts or perceptions are a very, very economical, very, very compressed representation of reality, they may cause us to understand things in a way and act in a way that causes suffering for us and for other people. When we think of people as an enemy, when we think of someone as a liar, when we think of someone as unfavorably inclined towards us, we trap them in that conception. A lot of forgiveness work that we do is trying to free people from those concepts, not make our mind attached to those extremely negative concepts that trigger in our mind every time we come across that person, or we think about them, or we hear about them. So where concepts are representations of the world, of the environment, are causing us to create our own suffering, causing us to act in unwholesome ways, it is important to understand that they are just representation. And that is one of the ways in which we can understand phenomena better. So that's something I wanted to share. Happy to hear thoughts about where looking at concepts in a certain way helped you or created problems for you, and how you would think about taking a step back from the concepts, looking at reality again. That would help you to act in a more wholesome way in a situation. Happy to hear thoughts, happy to hear questions about this.
Hello, Rajiv, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Good. Well, thank you very much. This was yes, a wonderful exposition. I'm reminded of when we look at current brain research. I think the estimate is that we only process about 10% of what comes in through the senses. And everything else is an interpretation based on past experience. So if we're walking down the road, we don't take in all the details of the buildings or the change in perspective. Our brain just fills in that information. So if we then think about the other reflexes that we have, so the reflexes we have about maybe judgment or criticism around individuals or behavior or any other stimulus that comes in, we're constantly re-referencing what we've previously experienced. So if you like, we're reconfirming the truths that we have made truths, not necessarily ultimate truths. And so it's what's wonderful about the teaching here is that the invitation is to do something different. So something that we're so familiar with, so used to doing, we're being invited to adopt a different approach. And I particularly like the way that you described the feeling, perception, and consciousness as being a compressed amount of information, and that the knowledge and vision that we're being asked to develop is, if you like, a process of decompression. And if we look at some of the information in, if we look from a computer point of view or data point of view, when we compress data, we lose certain information. We can still retain the outward form, perhaps. So if we compress a picture file, we can still see the sort of recognizable aspect of it, but we don't notice the information that we've lost. And the knowledge and vision of things as they really are is about refinding that information that we've lost. And I think the Buddha's teaching here and the process of meditation, and particularly around Bhante Viramas's teaching of using right effort. Right effort is constantly inviting us to come back from that process of compressing. As soon as we move into the craving and into the clinging, we're in the process of compressing, and we're being invited to come back from that point. So I thought the way that you presented it was, yeah, that was a very really nice sort of another angle, another perception on what's being described here. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. That was a very nice reflection. It brought two thoughts in my mind. So one part where you were talking about the brain research. So I was talking to a friend who studies optics, and he told me, just to give an extent of idea of how much we compress information, right? So at any point of time when we're looking, right? So if you extend your arm and you see your thumbnail, right? So that area is the only thing you're really seeing in high definition. Over 90% of the visual part of your brain, visual cortex, is directed towards that thumbnail. Everything else is being filled in from the gaps. So all the optical illusions that we see, a lot of them on the internet. There's this famous video of people playing basketball, and a man in a gorilla suit walks through, and nobody gets it when they're viewing it for the first time, because they're following where the ball is. They ascribe that. So as I said, consciousness is a discriminatory capability that helps in identifying what is important in a situation. So our mind, for example, as you mentioned from our past experiences, say if there is a bunch of people bouncing a ball, then probably where the ball goes and who scores something is important. So we pay attention to that. So that was one thing that came to mind. The other thing is adding to what you talked about, coming back from craving and clinging. So by the time we go to craving, clinging, by the time we are down that slope, so instead of from something happening, understanding an event happened, starting with putting labels on it, what we perceive, getting more personal with it, getting more attached to the outcomes, compressing it further. I like it, I don't like it, I like it because, I don't like it because, what is the outcome I want, what is the outcome I don't want, how happy will I be, how happy I won't be. So apart from that, when we take a step back, what it also allows us, the way that we so perceive things, particular situations, particular people, our relations with them. So all perceptions are relational. They always have also, they're not just, a car is not just a car, it also includes what I feel about a car. It's all, they're all placed in the space with the concept of I as an origin point, right? So it may be a different I that has a certain opinion towards cars, a different I that has an opinion towards different political beliefs, a different I that has an opinion towards what foods are tasty versus what is not tasty, right? So it is also an opportunity. We cannot work, fundamentally we cannot work in a state of processing all information raw at all points of time. But what we want to do is we also want to change the conceptions in a way that there is less craving and clinging. So when we have a concept, when we have a perception of a person, if we have that label, that perception or that concept of that person as an enemy, as someone who has hurt us, so automatically it is connected with a painful feeling, it is connected with a craving, it is connected with deep attachment, not wanting to encounter that person, or maybe an attachment to a feeling of harm, of wishing harm upon that person, right? So changing that concept, right, being allowed, removing the craving and clinging from it, maybe reducing that person to someone who is liable to take unwholesome actions because of their compulsions, someone who is worthy of your compassion but maybe not worthy of being vulnerable in front of them or exposing yourself to harm from them. So once you change that conception, it also affects the way craving and clinging flows when you come across that information, when you come across that context in the future. So it is not just about being able to go beyond the reductive way that we see things, but it is also about reshaping the concepts that we have in our mind. And this connects very closely with what is also mentioned in the precepts, right? So when the Buddha says, do not talk ill of people, do not speak harshly, when he encourages taking the precept of no falsehood, no divisive speech, no slander, no harsh words. So when we use those words, and as you rightly mentioned, right, we are learning and always reinforcing how we think of things based on our experience. So every time we look at a person in a certain way, think of a person in a certain way, we are reinforcing that. So the ability to take a step back, reduce the craving and clinging, and change the perception or the concept that we attach with a certain situation, certain person, in a way that it doesn't automatically propel us towards unwholesome behavior, right? Whether it is feeling bad internally or going and doing something that makes another person suffer. I think that is a great thing that comes from understanding that concepts are not reality and they are just a representation of reality. So just wanted to add those two thoughts to your reflection. Yeah.
I don't know if it was the same for everyone, but unfortunately you broke up a little bit around that. Could you just repeat that last point you were saying, because I only got about 30% of it.
Okay. So the last part I was talking about, what part did you hear? If you could just help me with that.
So you were making a second point, and I think it might be my reception that's breaking up a lot. I don't know if it's the same for everyone else, but I didn't hear the second point you were making.
So the second point that I was making is because we tend to use concepts as a proxy for reality, right? So it is also a great opportunity for us to not just try and look at the world in a decompressed fashion, because that is something which is very expensive and hard to do from purely a mental processing limitations perspective, right? But what it also allows us to do is, when we reduce the craving and clinging, when we reduce our attachment to a certain outcome or to a certain opinion about that concept. So if we are taking the example of a person who has done something harmful for us in the past, and we put a label on them, and this is an enemy, this is a liar, this is this is a bad person, right? So those concepts, when they come again, they take us down the same path of attachment and craving and click. So we also have the option of reshaping our concepts in a way that promotes wholesome behavior within us. So instead of talking about this is my arch enemy, or my nemesis or something, we can, for example, relabel the person as someone who is compulsive and liable to take unwholesome actions, harmful actions for others. That allows us not to be triggered, while at the same time it gives us the wisdom not to put ourselves in harm's way. So not only can we understand that concepts are only an approximate and very, very, very economical representation of reality, by reshaping our concepts, we can also change how likely we are to take ourselves down a path of craving, clinging, extreme personalization, getting emotional, getting attached to certain outcomes, or indulging in unwholesome behaviors like wishing harm for someone or participating in slander. So breaking the precepts that the Buddha talks about, divisive speech, slander, harsh speech, untruths. So instead of making ourselves more vulnerable to that, we can actually change the conceptions in a way that allows us to take wholesome actions and perform wholesome actions that are good for us and for other people. So that was the other thing I wanted to say. So it's not just about seeing things in their very raw form, which is something difficult to do all the time, but it is also about reshaping or redefining our view, redefining how we inject meaning into different people, different relationships, different concepts. So people are typically the biggest source of pain for most humans. So we can very actively redefine the concepts that our mind uses to label our relations with them or to label them, which are very reductive in themselves.
Yeah, I think that's very useful, and one of the ways that strikes me that we can move down this road of not being caught up in our conceptions and our false perceptions is the process of using compassion towards the other person or the other environment, seeing perhaps how they're also caught up in their craving and clinging. And by reframing it in that way, it's then not about a personal thing for us. It's not that they're directing this personally at us, but they're, as Sister Kima might say, it's coming from them because of where they are. It just happens to be expressed in our direction, but it's our choice about whether we pick that up or not. And if we allow compassion to be present in our relating to how a person or a circumstance is playing out, then we're less likely for ourselves to go down the craving and clinging road.
Absolutely. That is why compassion is such a liberating abode.
Yeah. It's a very liberating teaching.
Yeah.
So thank you, Rajiv.
Thank you, Hugh. Anyone else who would like to chime in? Murali, if you're speaking, your mic is, you're muted right now.
Rajiv ji, Murli here.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir. This is regarding, we are talking about the consciousness, the object which we see, and there is a clinging, and there is a perception also arises in that. So it is because there is a ear and ear consciousness, and you have a feeling and you have a perception, right, in the ear. But is there any eye related which is actually taking the whole concepts and then triggering to knowing, triggering to good feeling, bad feeling, or a neutral feeling? But in terms of the practice, how exactly we can actually just explore them in a view and then slowify with the process of the data, the information of that, so that the in terms of the practicality of that, that whatever we have the senses. So is there any insight for that to actually understand it and then put it into the practice? So that's my question.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Murali. And so let me just say one thing. Right? So what the Buddha talks about the aggregates, right? So as I mentioned, these three are part of the 5 aggregates: form, fabrications or formations, sanskara, and then we have feeling, perception, and consciousness. And what the Buddha says about each of them is eventually we want to understand that this is not me, this is not mine, this is not myself. So whenever a certain feeling comes, the natural tendency. So if we think about the self also, right? So we can also think about the self as a very big concept. It is one of the Sangya, right? So when you have a small child, for instance, a child doesn't understand that they are a different person from their mother, or they are a different person from other people. So for example, if you try to play hide and seek, they don't understand the concept because they feel if I'm hiding, then since I know I'm hiding, automatically everybody else knows I'm hiding, right? So even the self becomes a concept that we have. But what happens is, Kirana has shared the dependent origination chart here, which you can take a look at. But what happens is when a feeling comes, when a painful or pleasant feeling comes, which is most likely to trigger an action from your side. So if it is neutral, more or less, we ignore that. It is a different danger. It is called indifference, but let's not get into that at the moment. Indifference also reinforces your concept of identity or I, right? But what happens is the fastest way for you to act, for your mind and body to get you to act, is to say, frame that particular thing as I like it or I don't like it. So you are about to step on a thorn, or you get the smell of a very delicious preparation of food, and the fastest way for you to act, the body says, hey, this is good for stepping on a thorn is really bad for survival and for energy conservation, and eating delicious food is very good for that, right? So immediately the fastest way for you to take action is to say I like it or I don't like it. Similarly, if you're crossing the street and a vehicle is coming towards you, it may be possible for you to objectively look at the physics of that vehicle coming in contact with you, but it's easier to just say, just react, personalize it, and jump out of the way, knowing that I need to save myself, right? So that compression I helps a lot in most cases. But what happens is, in multiple cases, things are not this short term, right? So I'm thirsty, I drink a glass of water, a vehicle is coming, I get out of the way. So we also look at longer term things. We look at what's happened in the past, we try to plan for what's happened in the future. So when it comes to two persons, for instance, you have multiple things, multiple concepts attached to your liking or disliking of something. If somebody says something that is naturally unpleasant to you, you don't stop at that, you don't identify it as an unpleasant feeling, you say, I don't like it. Then you start the story of, I don't like it because this is disrespectful. Then you continue with that story, I think you are a terrible person. I blame your parents for making you a terrible person. You can go into multiple stories over there. Be stuck in that. You're continuously stuck in that. There is no action that you are taking, or the only action that you're going to take is going to be unwholesome. You say something disrespectful back, or you may not be in a position to say something to the other person, and you keep feeling bad, suffering on account of this. So what is the action to be taken here? The action is simply when your mind gets attached with something with craving. You use the 6 R's. You recognize that your attention is stuck in that situation based on that craving, that personalization, that emotionality, that attachment to a certain outcome. I like this, I don't like this, I want it this way, right? You're stuck with that, you recognize that, you let that thought be. You relax the tension and tightness in your mind. That is a symptom of that craving. Smile and bring your attention back to a wholesome place, right? If you're meditating, you bring it back to your object of meditation. Otherwise, just smile and bring it back to a smiling mind and repeat it as many times as required. The only thing, two things you can do in a situation is either take an action, and when we take an action, we want to do it without craving. We want to take, that will allow us to take a wholesome action. Or if there is no action to be taken, you don't bother about it. Some politician said something on television. You can either choose to vote for or against them, or you can choose to have an argument with your friends about them, or you can choose to feel miserable about why this person is part of our political landscape, right? So you can do that. So the more craving you have, the more personalization that you have with that concept. And Hugh also talked about a little while back about, you know, how when we compress information, we end up creating certain self-referencing and self-reinforcing notions, right? So somebody you don't like does something good, and you say that was accidental. Someone you like does something good, you say that is intentional. Someone you don't like does something bad, you say it is intentional. Someone you like does something bad, and you say that is accidental. So these kind of biases keep coming in, keep creeping. So every time when we use the 6 R's, when we diffuse that craving in that situation, we are able to see the situation not from the colored lens of I like it, I don't like it, I want a certain outcome. You're able to reframe it. You are able to understand over time, as you keep doing this, your cravings related to a certain situation starts diffusing. So whenever that situation comes up, that has come up in your mind, and you use the 6 R's, as you keep using the 6 R's, every time it comes, the last R stands for repeat, right? So something that you have an attachment for won't just disappear forever when you use the 6 R's for the first time. As you use it multiple times, your mind starts to learn, this is not something I need to get personally agitated about, emotional about. I don't need to tie my happiness and sadness and frustration to the outcome that comes from this situation. Your mind starts to see that. And once it starts to see that, it just sees that this is a situation, tries to reframe it in a way that wholesome action can be taken in the future without allowing it to affect you or hijack your state of mind. So in terms of action, what you want to do is use 6 R's whenever you get into a state that I like it, I don't like it, examine what is a different way to reframe that. The other thing, again, that Hugh brought up is compassion. When it involves people, look at yourself in terms of the worst experiences that you've had. the most unwholesome actions that you have taken, right? Again, we have that bias, right? When we do something bad, it is accidental, and we do something good, it is intentional. Or you may have the other kind of bias where if you're in a cycle of self-loathing, right? You may say everything bad that I do is intentional and everything good that I do is accidental. So those kind of biases about us, about other people, right? Try to examine those. Why I like it, why I don't like it. What is a way for me to reframe it, right? That is something you can do analytically. The other thing that will help in absorbing or having this new perception or new concept take place in your mind is to reduce the attachment that you have to the previous framing of the incident that you have. So the fact that it had a lot of craving in it, that it created a lot of tension and tightness in your mind, that it created a lot of agitation, that it created a lot of passion in you, that I like this or I don't like this, I want it to be in a certain way. If it is not that way, I will be unhappy. So as you reduce that, the opportunity for you to reframe that event, that incident, that becomes much easier. So that's how you use it in practice. When in doubt, if your mind is tight and tense, use the 6 R's. That is the best thing to do, even if you're not able to identify this framing, reframing. Over time, as you practice, you will start seeing things that used to affect you a lot don't affect you as much. And when you see that, you understand it is just the way you define them in your mind, just the concepts you attach to them, that made you act so personally towards them, right? So that's how you start changing the way you frame meaning into different situations, different people, different things that you encounter. Was that helpful, Murli?
Yeah, thanks, Rajiv ji. And one small maybe difference between the Vijnana and the Chitta. Does you have any different, I mean, definition for that? Or
I would say don't.
mind and consciousness. Yeah.
Sorry?
It's a mind and consciousness.
Yeah. So Vigyan, let's look at Vigyan as that something, let's use the definition that is given here, right? So which is that it cognizes pleasurable, painful, and neither pleasant nor painful, right? So try to think of it as something that is discriminating information, right? Between all the information that you're receiving from the environment, it is trying to discriminate different signals. It is what helps you distinguish between different colors. Perception helps you add labels to that this is red, this color, this is if I see 3 different colors. Consciousness helps you identify I'm seeing 3 different colors, and the fact that it is a color, the fact that it is red, it is white, it is blue, those are the labels that are coming from your perception, right? And Chit is very different in terms of it is represents, you can say, the state of mind, tension and tightness in your mind, right? Being able to understand that. So that is a kind of state of your Chit. It's your consciousness or Vigyan which helps in discriminating what it feels like when you're smiling and sending one of the Brahma Viharas or sublime attitude, when you're sending those good wishes to other people, what your mind feels like, versus when you are agitated, you are angry at someone and your mind gets constricted. So the difference between those two feelings, that is coming from Vigyan, that ability to discriminate between these two states. But what is that a state of, right? So that state of mind, that state of agitation, that state of calm is referred to as Chit.
Thank you, Rajiv ji. Thank you so much. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Any other
I have,
thoughts?
I have a question, Rajiv. So in the sutta, you say that wisdom needs to be developed and consciousness needs to be fully understood, right? So I want to know, like, how do I know that my wisdom is developing? What is the parameter for that?
What is the parameter for that? The ability to see that different experiences that you're having are part of a impersonal process. So every time, just give me one second. So if we take the construct of this sutta, right? Sariputta says, wisdom is someone who understands the truth of suffering, the origin of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path leading to that, right? So every time you are using 6 R's, which is right effort or harmonious application, there are multiple ways to define it. Samma vayamo. It literally translated means appropriate exercise, right? Appropriate application. So every time you're using it, right, you are able to identify, when you identify, recognize that your mind is attached to a certain thought with certain tension and tightness in your mind, right? So that is the craving in action. Indulging in that will lead you eventually to dissatisfactory state, right? So you start thinking about, everybody has their favorite rabbit holes, right? So some people obsess about losing weight or their fitness. Some people obsess about their financial status. Some people obsess about their relationships, or lack of relationships. Some people obsess over certain behavior of people in their workplace. So there are certain things that keep creating continuous suffering for us, right? So we understand what is suffering, but as we start identifying that there are certain thoughts that come up in our mind that create tension and tightness, right? When the way we practice by using one of the Brahma Viharas as an object of meditation, where we are sending good wishes out to other people than us, it's a very contrasting state from a state of desperately wanting a certain outcome, being attached to a certain situation, right? So we start seeing that contrast. We start seeing when our mind becomes constricted, tight and tense, becomes very personalized, becomes very selfish, becomes very obsessed with getting something or not getting away from something, right? So by that, we are understanding the origin of suffering. If we don't remove that basis of craving, that basis of attachment, that basis of only being happy if the entire world cooperates to make things the way that I want it, right? So if that is our precondition for being happy, then the likelihood is something or the other. Someone will forget to do their job, or someone will decide not to cooperate with you, and the end outcome will be something that does not make you happy. So that craving, that being attached to that certain outcome happening and demanding that the world cooperate, right? That is the origin of suffering. When you are meditating, when you are able to identify this more quickly, when you're able to see that in different situations in life, like I said, we have pet peeves. So when you are obsessing over something, when you're arguing with someone, when you're feeling miserable about something, you are able to identify that your mind has become tense and tight, that you are only getting frustrated because the world is not cooperating with you and giving you the outcome that you are attached to, right? Being able to identify that, being able to understand that in more situations throughout your day, right? Not just when you're meditating and your mind wanders off from the object of meditation, being able to see that in your day, right? Then the second part, right? The cessation, the third truth, the cessation of suffering. Once you have recognized that, not chasing after it, right? Once you have recognized that, not saying, okay, I will use right effort some other time. Right now, I will continue obsessing over it because it feels good, something like that. Instead of doing that, or saying, I'm going to fight my mind. I'm going to crush my mind. I'm going to make sure this thought doesn't come. Let me distract myself with something else. Let me force my mind into some other activity. So instead of that violence, what you do is you use the 6 hours, you use right effort, right? So every time you do that, you are able to reduce that craving, recognize, release that thought, not go fighting with it, not go chasing with it. Relax the tension and tightness in your mind, smile, and bring your mind to an uplifted state, right? Repeat it every time it goes. So as you are doing it, the ability to identify this multiple times a day, that is your mindfulness becoming better. And as you keep understanding this, as you keep understanding this process, you are understanding consciousness better. You're understanding how consciousness leads to signals of pain and pleasure that are causing you to become attached to a situation. You're understanding that and you're developing your wisdom. So every time you're able to recognize it and use the 6 hours, use right effort, you're developing your wisdom. And the best way to look at your progress is look at the last time you were either unable to recognize it or you recognize it but did not use right effort. See what had happened, reflect on that, see that did it lead to good outcomes or did it just lead to your and other people's suffering. See that reflection will help in shaping your actions in the future. Just doing that, being able to see that, being able to do that, and being able to take actions that are more wholesome, that are more compassionate. Any action that you take that is not rooted in loving kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity, that action is something that you want to learn, that you've learned from, that you want to become better at, right? That is a lapse in wisdom. Every action that you take with these as basis is going to be a wholesome action, right? So we just want to move from one thing to the other. And to do that, we keep practicing. It's all about repetition. We keep practicing wholesome actions as often as we can. We keep using the right effort as often as we can. And whenever we perform an unwholesome action, we can share it with a spiritual friend and make a determination, right? Speak out aloud, write it, make a determination not to do it again. So in effect, you're training your mind to be more vigilant when such a situation comes again. The mind is trainable in every instant. The mind learns from every instant. Our job is to make sure it is learning the right lesson. So put the right information in front of us, create in front of the mind, create the right environment for the mind to learn wholesome lessons. Right. So your actions is the best barometer of your wisdom. Are you taking actions that are wholesome, that are not leading to your suffering and that are not leading to the suffering of other people? Your state of mind and the quality of your actions. That is the only thing that matters.
Last question, Rajiv. So the wisdom is not the only result from meditation. Is it like that or no?
I did not understand your question. Can you repeat that?
So because wisdom needs to be developed, right? So needs to develop the wisdom is not the only way through meditation. So it means like in the daily basis, like through contemplation, through the ability to 6 hours everything, it can lead to develop the wisdom.
So what is the question?
Or how you like this? Like this wisdom, is this only developed by meditation? No, right?
Yes, meditation is so the
one of them.
No, meditation, the practice. So the Buddha often says this, if you notice in the Dhammapada, it says, just being able to recite and memorize or analyze the holy text, but not living according to it, does not give you the fruits of the holy life, right? So meditation is something, the practice that you're doing. And when I say meditation, I don't mean just sitting meditation. It includes walking meditation. It includes being mindful and using right effort throughout your life, right? So eventually you may understand something intellectually, but does it, the biggest test, like I said, is how it changes your personality, right? So does it lead you to better states of mind for yourself? Does it lead you to taking wholesome actions that are good for yourself and for others, right? And to be able to do that, the three skills that the Buddha talks about in the whole eightfold path is important for it, right? But in terms of skills, so the eightfold path talks about everything from the right view, which is the understanding, right? The right resolve, right? Having the intention, once you have the understanding, having the intention to actually develop your wisdom, being able to experience life in a different way. Then there is a section on conduct, right? So how do you do conduct which is wholesome for you, or how do you live a lifestyle that is wholesome for you, and how do you look at your actions in a way that they are wholesome. But the skills that are talked about is mindfulness, being able to remember to observe where your attention is and how it moves, right? So mindfulness is important. The second part is right application, the 6 R's, and the third part is immersion, right? So collectedness, which is the jhanas. So the jhanas are equally important because what they allow is for you to develop your mindfulness and your ability to use 6 R's in an environment that really helps you to train. So think of it like going to a gym to train for sport, right? So playing sport is the rest of your life, and the meditation sitting that you have going through the jhanas is like a focused gym session where you're working your abilities of meditation, of mindfulness and right effort. The other thing that happens as you go through the jhanas is you have a lot of insights, right? You understand more, you are able to see more about that whole impersonal process that is happening. So your insights about dependent origination, your insights about craving, your insights about how you keep falling in the same rabbit holes again and again, that comes. And what we talked about in terms of reshaping concepts, reducing the attachment we have to certain concepts, right? So how we feel about certain people, certain situations, being able to reduce the craving in those situations while being in one of the jhanas allows us to be free of our attachment, our slavery to the like or dislike of that situation, right? So it allows us to free from that. So yes, this is there are the Buddha talks about people who are able to just understand it intellectually or just hear a talk from the Buddha and get that kind of wisdom, complete liberation. But let's acknowledge the truth that there is nobody who's speaking like the Buddha around right now. And the fact that we live in a extremely weaponized world of attention monetizing gizmos. So I would say, meditation, the 3 skills, right? Mindfulness, right application, and right collectedness, right? So these are your best bet of actually developing wisdom, right? So this is giving yourself the best chance. Anything else that might happen, maybe a million in one shot, but this is what, if you were to bet everything on, this is what I would recommend you bet it on.
Okay, thank you, Rajiv. I think I got it.
Okay, it's been a while. Feel free to, I'll share my number here. I think it also goes out on the announcement. So please feel free to drop in questions and we can have a chat. I've been busy the last few days, but tomorrow and day after tomorrow, I will have some time to respond to questions. So please feel free to send those in, and I will suggest that we stop the session for today at the moment, and we can, yeah, any other questions can be. Taken. Otherwise, we can just wait. If there's one last question anybody has, I'm happy to take that, and we'll stop the session. Any questions?
Sorry, sir. It's a bit late today. I will WhatsApp you, sir. One question is there. Question is like, at what state of mind one can see the devas?
I'm not the right person to answer that. I don't like to talk about the devas, and there are a few things that I like not to talk about. I think I will skip them. I will direct you to other teachers who may be
Fine, sir.
happy.
You should have karma also.
Yes, you have asked that question. We can have a session on that actually.
That is actually you must have experienced earlier, then only he will see all such things.
Fine, sir. Fine.
Yeah, so it's let me just say it's a choice not to.
No, it's not possible to everyone. Second question, what I want to convey, Mr. Rajiv. You have started with wisdom. She is speaking about the academic way. And you have explained it extensively that in a short four noble truths that would have solved. That is my intention of answer. Don't think otherwise.
Okay, sorry, I'm trying to understand. You are suggesting that just the Four Noble Truths.
Wisdom. Her question of wisdom.
A question of wisdom was actually, how do you know that wisdom is developing?
That's okay. Wisdom she is comparing with the academic way. The basic understanding. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Wishing everyone a nice evening. We'll just end the session.